Welcome. Thanks for joining us here at Swinburne for the 2023 Barbara Dicker Oration, a new era for dementia diagnosis and treatment. I'd love to also acknowledge our generous donors, key alumni, industry partners, guests of the Dicker family and the Swinburne Council who are joining us here today. We've had a bumper registration for this event, which I think is testament to the important work that we're going to hear about tonight as well. A little bit of housekeeping. So if you need the bathrooms, they are through this door, past the escalators on the right-hand side. It'd be wonderful if we could please switch mobile phones off. And in the event of emergency, we have exits here and at the back of the room, and we will usher you to a safe spot. The annual Barbara Dicker Oration is an initiative of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. It facilitates meaningful conversation about mental health and brain sciences, as well as research advancements in both these fields. This year, we welcome special guest speaker, Professor Scott Ayton, the head of the Dementia Mission and Translational Neurodegeneration Laboratory at the Florey Institute and director of the Centre of Research Excellence in Enhanced Dementia Diagnosis, to speak about the topic, a new era for dementia diagnosis and treatment. Alzheimer's disease is the leading cause of dementia and a disease that robs people of their memory and capacity to function independently. It's the second leading cause of death in Australia, and around 400,000 people are currently living with dementia in Australia. With this figure set to increase due to our ageing population, it's adding further challenge to our health and aged care systems. Treatment is urgently needed. Professor Ayton will present on the rapidly changing landscape of dementia care and treatment, as well as profiling potential new opportunities to improve the lives of people living with dementia. It's wonderful to be able to welcome a wide cross-section of the Swinburne community here tonight for tonight's oration, and followed by an intimate opportunity for the Dicker family and their friends to connect. I'd love to now welcome Professor John Evans, our Pro-Vice Chancellor of Indigenous Engagement, to do the acknowledgement of country. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, whose lands all three of our campus sit upon. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and to welcome you here today. I was here last year for the oration, and it was an outstanding presentation. And I was just telling Ian Dicker that I really enjoyed last year's presentation. It was involved medication or novel medications for the treatment of mental illness. It was outstanding. And also tonight's a very pertinent question, because as the Indigenous population ages, dementia will become an increasing issue to be dealt with. My own mother had dementia and we had to put her in a facility for 6 years. So I think it's a very good choice today to have someone come and speak about dementia. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Wamanjeka.
Thanks, John. I forgot to introduce myself, I just realised. My name's Luke Bell and I'm the Director of Advancement at Swinburne. I'd like to welcome Professor Simon Ridings, Swinburne's Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Chief Academic Officer, to speak on behalf of our Vice-Chancellor. Thanks, Simon.
Good evening, and thank you, Luke. And thank Professor John Evans for a welcome to country and acknowledgement. I'd like to warmly welcome and acknowledge members of the Dicker family, Dr. Ian Dicker, Chair of the Barbara Dicker Sciences Foundation, Dr. Tony Dicker, and members of the Dicker family who have joined us here this evening. Our keynote speaker is Scott Ayton, the Honourable Ted Baillieu, welcome, and members of Swinburne Council, who I've seen several of this evening, but I can't see from where I'm standing right now. A warm welcome to everybody who's chosen to join us here in the room this evening. This really is an important event in the Swinburne calendar. A number of people who I bumped into this evening have already made the point to me that they're glad to be back this year because previous occasions have been fantastic, and they're looking forward to it, not just this evening, but looking forward to it again. The event is a memorable way to honour the late Barbara Dicker and her legacy and the inspiring work her family carries on today through the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. I can't think of a better person to speak to us this evening than Professor Ayton. Professor Ayton's dedication in neuroscience and current work in advancing new drugs for dementia is outstanding, widely recognised, and I'm sure is the reason why so many people are looking forward to the presentation tonight. The partnership and friendship between the Foundation and Swinburne began more than a decade ago. Over the past 12 years, we've created a strong partnership that spans 3 generations of the Dicker family, many of whom are with us this evening. The support of the Dicker family enables Swinburne to conduct important research that in really tangible ways is improving the lives of people affected by neurological and psychological disorders. It also includes a generous investment in our early career researchers who are undertaking especially innovative research, particularly in the areas of sleep, dementia and mental health. Thanks to the support of the Foundation, Swinburne now has a great and increasing depth of talent and expertise in these important areas. The events of the last couple of years have highlighted, I'm sure, to all of us just how important our mental health is and how important it is to be aware of that. According to the latest national study of mental health and wellbeing, 42.9% of people have experienced some mental disorder at some stage in their lifetime. That's more than 8.5 million people. We know the symptoms of these disorders have lasting impacts, and the mission to treat them effectively requires incredible investments of very specialised resources. This is an issue that touches all of us, either directly or indirectly. We're thankful for the generous pledge made in 2020 by the Foundation for a further 5 years of funding to Swinburne to enable integral research and development to continue. I'm so pleased that the partnership between Swinburne and the Foundation is so strong. I've no doubt the strength of the partnership reflects the close alignment of our ambitions. Swinburne Horizon 2025 as a strategy centres on our vision of people and technology working together to build a better world. This vision captures our belief that technology can bring about social and cultural good and can be used to solve some of the world's greatest challenges. At Swinburne, we're committed to using technology to advance human health and bring about important breakthroughs to deliver more for those who need care today. We can do this in large part through our partnership with the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. In recent years, some of the technology-led innovations that the Foundation has supported have included using mobile apps to improve cognitive stimulation for people with dementia, which we know will be a diagnosis affecting more than 1 million people in Australia by about 2050. Australia's largest research trial examining the promise of the active ingredient in psychedelic mushrooms in tackling treatment-resistant depression, a free telehealth service to provide ongoing emotional support to people in aged care residencies in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and developing a more supportive emergency department for patients with mental health disorders. And that's really just to name a few of in fact many. Tonight, you'll have the opportunity to mingle with some of our researchers and to see and hear about from them the outcomes of their work across diverse areas such as bipolar disorder, dementia, depression, sleep disorders, and in fact, your mental health. All of these outcomes made possible by the investment from the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. We are very fortunate to have an internationally recognised leader in mental health, Professor Scott Ayton, join us to deliver the Barbara Dicker Oration. Again, Scott, thank you so very, very much for that. The work of Professor Ayton aligns very strongly with Swinburne's vision, including our flagship area of medical technology, and really does encapsulate the ambition of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation, particularly in the core area of dementia research. Professor Ayton, I'm looking forward to hearing about your current work in advancing new drugs into clinical practice and the changes that these are making for people experiencing dementia. To close, I'd like to thank again the Dicker family for their vision and for their generosity. we look forward to the wonderful advancements that will be achieved in our second decade of this important partnership. I'd also like to thank the wider Swinburne philanthropic community. This essential work that we're talking about this evening cannot be done without the incredible support of our generous donors. We're very grateful to you for that. I encourage everyone joining us this evening to consider how you may also wish to invest in Swinburne's mission of people and technology working together to build a better world. Thank you all for being here, and I really do hope that you enjoy this evening's event. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Ridings. I now would like to introduce Dr. Tony Dicker, the Chair of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation, to speak on behalf of the Foundation and the family. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my name's Tony Dicker. I'm Chair, as mentioned, and I think Simon just stole my notes. I was going to say exactly the same things pretty much, which makes it all good. So, why are we here tonight? My father, Ian, about a bit over 12 years ago, decided this would be a nice way to do things, to find something to remember Mum, and approached Swinburne and said, what's possible? What are your pain points? And Swinburne said, a really difficult area is that early career researcher. How do they get going? How do they start their research? How can we help? Hence the foundation and this structure where they're amazing meetings to go along to. You know you're walking in and there is no way that you are the smartest person in the room. It's fantastic just to hear these people speak, ideas, thinking. It's just a wonderful experience. So on behalf of the family, thank you to Swinburne for this experience that we get to have in contributing and engaging with and enjoying the work done by the foundation, by the university. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and just highlight a couple of people who have really helped. Professor Gavin Lambert, I can see somewhere. Where's he hidden himself? There he is. Gavin does an amazing job. What Gavin does is the unheralded administration behind the whole process of handing out the money. So the job of receiving the grants, assessing all the grants, finding other people to assess the grants, teach them how to assess the grants, doesn't get much praise, but it's a huge job. So Gavin, thank you so much for the work you do in that regard. And Susan, you are always there driving things, giving us ideas, helping guide us, answering questions. Your input has been invaluable for the foundation to make sure the whole thing works. So I also want to pass on a heartfelt, sincere thank you for your friendship, the opportunities I have to engage with you and learn so much from you, and the help you've given us in making this whole thing actually work. But not here to hear me speak. Scott's much more interesting than I am, much smarter than I am. I just mentioned to Scott before, though, the last time we had someone speaking about dementia, he had a knighthood, so no pressure.
Thanks, Tony. So I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Scott Ayton. I'll reiterate the things that I've said before, but Scott is a National Health and Medical Research Council Investigator Level 1. He's the head of the Dementia Mission and Translational Neurodegeneration Laboratory at the Florey Institute. He's the Director of the Centre for Research Excellence in Enhanced Dementia Diagnosis. Scott trained in neuroscience at the University of Melbourne, where he investigated mechanisms of neurodegeneration in cellular and animal models. Scott has maintained an interest in basic neuroscience, but has also broadened his focus to include clinical research on biomarkers and has led a clinical trial of a candidate disease-modifying drug that emerged from his laboratory work. Scott is currently focused on translating promising diagnosis into clinical practice, as well as understanding disease mechanisms in order to advance new drugs through the clinical trials for dementia and risk factors and prevention of psychiatric disorders. Please join with me in welcoming Scott tonight to give tonight's oration.
Thank you, Luke, and to everyone for that very kind introductions. It is a great honour to be giving the Barbara Dicker Oration for 2023. And at the outset, I want to thank the Barbara Dicker Foundation for providing this wonderful opportunity, and also to Swinburne for hosting this event. It is of personal significance to me that I will be giving a lecture about dementia at Swinburne University in this year. My father was a student here at Swinburne University. He was studying engineering, and he was driving to class one day on a motorbike, and a car pulled out in front of him. And that moment changed his life forever. He had profound vision impairment, and his cognition was never the same. He lived a productive life as best he could. He raised a family, and he had his small business for 40 years. But over the last couple of years, and in this year particularly, I've seen his cognition deteriorate further and further. If we were to survey this room tonight, I've got no doubt that this experience, while the circumstances will differ, would be shared with many of you tonight. Many of you will be in the position that I am right now, asking, is this dementia? What do I do about it? There are decades where nothing much seems to happen, and then there are particular years where decades seems to happen. For the world more generally, and for Alzheimer's disease specifically, perhaps it's one of those years. From the outset, it would be easy to assume that not much has happened in dementia for a generation. But as somebody who's been at the coalface, I can tell you that there has been a remarkable transformation in how we understand the disease, how we diagnose the disease, and now even how we treat the disease. It has been a long and convoluted path, and one day this will no doubt be a docuseries on Netflix. But in 2023, we have the first disease-modifying drug approved for Alzheimer's disease in America. Next year, it'll be likely that this will also be approved in Australia. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this story, about the promise of these drugs, but also about the challenges. And importantly, I'm going to talk about what's the potential new directions, including our work in trying to develop a drug for Alzheimer's disease. But before I get to that, I want to talk about what dementia is and why we should care. Well, there we go. So, dementia, many of you will be very familiar with this. It's a loss of memory, and it's to the point where this really impacts on someone's life. People generally experience a loss of daily functioning, but more than the capacity to function in the day-to-day, dementia is a disease that robs you of who you are. It's a tragic and severe disease. Importantly, it's not a change in chemicals within the brain. It is a loss of brain cells which drives the disease. And so this is not reversible. This is something which progresses, it's insidious, and it keeps on getting more severe and severe. Alzheimer's, there are many types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common, which around about 70% of people with dementia have this particular type. And I'm going to focus on this today. You will be aware of the most common symptoms of dementia, and this is memory loss. And this is not just I lost my keys, it's to another level. But there are many other symptoms of dementia that are less well recognised. And this can be personality changes, this can be behavioural changes, which can occur in the early stages particularly. And there are lots of tragic stories of families breaking up and because of behavioural changes that are unrecognised symptoms of early dementia. And people can also have language impairments, ability to understand language and produce language. And Alzheimer's disease and dementia, it's a major disease. And it's a disease of our era. It was just a generation ago where Alzheimer's disease didn't feature in the top 10 causes of death. But over the last several years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the prevalence of dementia. It's now the second leading cause of death in Australia, and it's the leading cause of death for women. This is a massive challenge today, but it's going to get worse in the future, along with our ageing population. Apart from the challenges and just the terrible experience of living with dementia for the patients and their family, this has a massive impact on how we function as a society, because the investment that we need to make to care for people with dementia is quite significant. Half the people within residential aged care have dementia, and we've had 2 Royal Commissions to tell us we haven't yet figured out how to do aged care, partly because dementia is a very difficult disease to care for. Not only in residential aged care is this an issue, but also within our hospitals. So people with dementia who go to hospital for care for other reasons stay longer, and their care is expensive, and they've got poor outcomes. The government invests a huge amount of money every year into caring directly for people with dementia. If we can make a dent in this, if we can reduce the prevalence, if we could reduce the severity, this would translate to substantial savings. But to do that, we have to understand the biology of the disease. If we're going to treat the disease, we have to understand what's going on. And Alzheimer's disease is defined by these 2 lesions that occur in the brain. This is called amyloid plaque and neurofibrillary tangles. These are deposits that occur in the brain, and they're very characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. It was only around about 20 years ago that the only way we'd be able to look at this is if we were to examine the brain of someone who died with Alzheimer's disease. But over the last several years, we've been able to develop technology to be able to image this in living people. And this is an example of a PET scan, and you can see that someone with Alzheimer's disease, AD, you can see an enrichment of this pathology within the brain. And we've been able to use this to understand the natural history of the disease. And so the shocking thing that we've been able to realise now is that Alzheimer's disease actually begins in the middle age. So beta amyloid plaque accumulates in over a 30-year period. And so a 30-year period. So it happens in that middle age and then progresses towards people at a more advanced age. Slightly before we have symptom onset, there's the second pathology that emerges. This is called neurofibrillary tangles. And then shortly thereafter, we get loss of brain cells, neurodegeneration. And this is where we start to see the cognitive changes occur. You can imagine, given that there is this latent period of beta amyloid accumulation before we get cognition, we might assume that there are people with this pathology but yet don't have cognitive impairment. And this is true. If we were to survey people aged over 65, everybody who has got Alzheimer's disease has got this accumulation of amyloid plaque. But 1/3 of people who are regarded cognitively normal have this pathology within their brain. We've done all the tests we can to identify these people have got no memory impairment, yet they have this pathology in their brain. And so while they're okay when we look at them at baseline, if we follow this up longitudinally, we've noticed that these people tend to deteriorate subtly but progressively over time. This isn't everybody, but it's a lot of people who have this pathology. They start to accumulate cognitive change. So given this, it would be really important to be able to screen people for Alzheimer's disease or this pathology. Now, doing a PET scan is expensive and not practical to roll this out, but we're really encouraged because now that there are blood tests that are looking very promising. So this is an example of a blood test, and you can see this correlation with amyloid PET. And these, over the last couple of years, have shown remarkable progress. And now we're getting to accuracy of around about 90 to 95% accurate at predicting this pathology. And for the first time, we're going to be taking these blood tests into the clinic, into clinical practice, to see if they are indeed valuable. So we've shown the promise in clinical cohort studies, and now we need to see it in the real world. And we're going to be doing this next year in this program called the Centre of Research Excellence in Enhanced Dementia Diagnostics. We're going to take these blood tests and other diagnostics into clinical services throughout Australia, and we're going to test if indeed this does improve the diagnostic capacity. This is led by myself and many other clinicians and researchers throughout Australia, and we think it's a major initiative. Our vision is to enable fast, accurate and equitable dementia diagnosis across Australia, regardless of your postcode, and we think we can do that. We're going to be starting that in the first quarter of next year. But before we went straight into the clinic, we wanted to speak to participants, people who have undergone an experience of being diagnosed with dementia, and we wanted to speak to them about what is their experience, what were the positive things, what were the challenges, how could we improve this for them. And what we found is that there were some really great things and where the processes worked really well, and there were some things which were really difficult and challenging for someone going through a diagnosis. We asked them to communicate to this using a device called a river of life, where we used this analogy of a river where we've got twists and turns to get them to relate to them their experience of having a diagnosis of dementia. And this was a very powerful tool, and we learned so much about what usually happens in the process of dementia diagnosis. And we found that there were several challenges in the process of getting diagnosed. And this diagnosis process can take a long time. It can take more than a year for people to get diagnosed. And it begins with the person. One of the challenges of dementia is that people start to lose insight into themselves. And so they don't necessarily recognise that they've got cognitive change that's occurring. Usually it's the family members who start to notice it. And so the role of the family and friends is so important in helping us to taking that person to the next stage of getting diagnosed. But what we've realised is that not all the symptoms of dementia are obvious to the community, and we need a public health messaging initiative here to communicate what are the early signs of dementia. So that these can be picked up at a very early stage and then taken to, people can go to the GP, which is the next stage. And the GP plays such an important role in the diagnosis process. The GP, and what we found with the GPs is that there are some amazing GPs who have got a lot of experience with dementia, but there's a lot of GPs that don't have that background. And so there's an education piece there to increase awareness of dementia. And also, it's a challenging conversation speaking to somebody who's come into the GP office about having querying about, is this dementia? We want to normalise memory testing. In the same way we've normalised stool collection for bowel cancer testing, screening. We believe that we can normalise memory testing. As people get to an age where they're at risk, we should be doing this because there's many advantages for getting diagnosed at an early stage. Oops, gone. Okay, and then we get to the level of the specialist. It can be a long wait time to get into specialist, and you'd be surprised to hear that Victoria is the only state in which we have publicly funded memory testing services. These are called CADMS clinics. This is a major disease, and we don't yet have a national coordinated approach to having this diagnosed. But even when we get to the level of the specialist, the accuracy of dementia diagnosis or Alzheimer's disease diagnosis is only about 70%. So we've got a long way to go there. And we hope that these new diagnostics will really improve that, but that's what we're hoping to see over the next couple of years. And finally, the follow-up. There's no funded mechanism to follow up patients over the long term. This is a major disease which is going to cause a lot of life change, but we have no capacity to follow up this and have continued care for patients. This is something we're really advocating for, and it's what our patients are telling us all the time. We need to have ongoing care with a specialist. There has been a sentiment out there of, well, what's the point? There's no drugs available. What's the point in providing ongoing care? Well, we think there's a lot we can do. And as part of the CREED, the Centre of Research Excellence that I'm running, we're going to be introducing cognitive coaches in the first year after treatment to put in interventions and advise on strategies to adjust to this life change. But this pessimism of why should we bother has been born out of the fact that we have had many, many drug trial failures in Alzheimer's disease. There have been more than 30 failed phase 3 clinical trial failures of anti-amyloid drugs. I doubt in the history of medicine we've come across something like this before. We've had failure after failure after failure after failure. And these drugs have all been designed to reduce this plaque within the brain, this amyloid plaque, and some of these drugs are very effective at doing that. You can see in this example of a PET scan, someone at baseline and they took this drug and it's been very effective at lowering amyloid plaque. The question is, does this improve cognition or does it slow down deterioration? And for a long time we never saw this. But then it was noted that in drugs which had more, that cause a bigger reduction in amyloid plaque. So this is towards the left, there's more amyloid plaque reduction. Oops. Towards the left, there's more amyloid plaque reduction, and towards here, there's better cognitive performance. We start to see this trend so we maybe need to have very high reductions of plaque to see an effect. And indeed, what we saw just only 13 months ago, the first evidence of disease modification in any clinical trial yet done in Alzheimer's disease. These are two drugs called lecanemab and donanemab. These are two high-dose drugs. These are the clinical trial results that have only just been reported. So this has caused a transformation in Alzheimer's disease research. It should be said at the outset, these results are modest. These aren't large effects. The hope is that these effects will lead to a bigger effects in the long term, okay? But what we have at the moment is it is a positive news. We do have an effect. We don't know the long-term benefit of this. And that's what we'll find out in the next couple of years. But with all the benefits, we've got to consider the risks. And that's also true for these drugs. These drugs cause something called ARIA, which is amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. These are abnormal structures that you can see with an MRI scan. We're not really sure what they are. In most cases, this happens frequently. Between 15 to 30% of people who take this drug develop this. And most of the time, there's no symptoms, or they're mild symptoms like mild headache. But they can be severe, and actually people have died because of this. And so we know that it's genetically associated, and so we can now start to understand the people who are at particular risk for this, and maybe they won't be the people who take this drug. But the long-term consequences of this we don't yet know. And the major effort now is to try and understand how can we mitigate the risk of ARIA. The long-term benefit of these drugs will really depend on the extent to which this improvement that we see here is sustained over the long term. And so it's very unclear at the moment, looking just at the cognitive readouts. I should have mentioned before, this is changing cognition over time, over an 18-month period, and you can see there's an improvement in both cases. The long-term benefit is not yet clear just by looking at the cognitive change. And so to try and understand this further, I should mention that this is a zoomed-in graph. If we zoom out, this is the full scale of dementia, and this is what we've looked at so far. Now, to be fair, that's the only thing you can do in a small trial, in a small 18-month trial. We really need to experience the people on treatment over years and years and years, and that's what we're doing now. But the long-term benefit is really going to depend on whether these drugs cause a change in trajectory, like this, where we see the benefit grow over time, or does it cause an initial boost in cognition, and then, therefore, you've got a parallel lines thereafter. And so the value of these drugs, and they're very expensive drugs, so it would be at least $50,000 a year. If it looks like this, then probably not going to be of potential value, but if it looks like this, then they could be of tremendous value. To try and get our handle on this, we reasoned that there's another way we can see if there's disease modification, and that's to look at the brain volume. In Alzheimer's disease, you get a shrinkage of the brain. As I mentioned, brain cells start to die. And so you get a smaller brain overall, and also you get an enlargement of something called the ventricles. And so these ordinarily occur in the brain. They're very important, but they increase in Alzheimer's disease as brain cells die. And so we thought we could look at the trajectory or the difference in brain volume in response to drugs to see if this is going to reveal a positive outcome. So we did something called a meta-analysis, where we looked at all the anti-amyloid drugs and to see if this impacted on the brain volume changes. And ultimately, we included some 8,000 to 10,000 participants in this study. And concerningly, what we found is that these new drugs, these ones that are associated with ARIA and going through to the clinic, they actually had accelerated volume changes. And so the direction is going in the wrong direction. And more concerningly, we found that this was strongly associated with this side effect I was talking about, ARIA. So in studies where there was more ARIA, there was a strongly associated increased volume changes. So we think, you may say to me, well, who cares? That's just a brain scan. What we care about is how people are presenting cognitively. We don't care about what's going on in the brain scan. And I take the point. We really should always orientate towards how the patient is experiencing and feeling. But also, I would say that we haven't necessarily looked at the time scales which are relevant to see an effect. The effect on cognition seems to happen fairly early, where we see this initial boost, but the brain volume changes happen later. These become obvious after 1 year. So maybe we'll need to see year after year to see if there's an effect on these brain volume changes. And we've actually now got the first evidence of this. So this was just presented last week, or 2 weeks ago actually. And so the hope was that this change that we see in at 18 months after the study will actually continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But actually, in the 6 months that has followed, the trend is actually in the wrong direction. People that were treated are actually accelerating a little bit worse cognitively. So where we're at the moment, as of 2023, there is great promise for these drugs, but it's not the end of the story. There's a lot we still need to figure out. And our analysis of the brain volume changes, we think, warrant concern. And it should give us pause as we go forward and offer these treatments. But we also don't know. This is just a brain scan, and sometimes these can give us misleading results. So we don't yet know if these are actually damaging or benign. But what we do know is that the trial sponsors, the drug companies that did this work, they have a wealth of data that would be very useful in helping us understand this risk. And we're calling upon them to release that data. They have not released that data, and we've done whatever I can to get them to release it. We've put out, we're at the tip of the iceberg, I think, with this analysis, and this additional data will be very useful for us. We've put out a range of recommendations that we could enact now to help us get a better understanding of the risk. But all this is really summed up in this one statement from a husband of a participant who participated in one of these trials. He said to me, "I know from personal experience how much a successful disease-modifying therapy is needed. This has to properly be considered and the pros and cons identified systematically. Unless pharma publishes properly, there won't be the solid progress we need." The pharmaceutical companies rely on the goodwill of researchers and participants to get this work done, these trials done, and we're calling on the drug companies to honour that and provide the data so that we can understand better the safety challenges of these drugs. Maybe it's fine, I hope it's fine, but we don't yet know. We've now got to the stage where we're very effective at lowering amyloid drugs. In the next couple of years, we're going to know to the extent that that is going to benefit patients. But there are many other approaches we could take to see if this would slow down disease progression. And these are just a number of many that I could look at. One of the things that we're focused on is iron. Why would we look at iron? Iron is a good thing, right? And you don't want to be iron deficient. This is true. Iron is very important for the body. But in excess, it can cause a rusting reaction. And so this is what happens in Alzheimer's disease. You get this accumulation of iron within the brain. This is this brown substance that you see here. Now, I've got to be clear here, this is not related to the iron that you eat, and it's not related to the iron in your blood. You can't measure the iron in your blood and then know what's going on within your brain. But these changes do occur. And so we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see if we could lower that brain iron and confer a benefit? Because what we looked at is that we looked at Alzheimer's disease, people with Alzheimer's disease, we measured brain iron in various different ways, and we found that people with more iron had a faster disease trajectory. They had worse cognitive outcomes. This is, in one way we've done this, is a post-mortem study. So we took brain samples of people who died with Alzheimer's disease, and we had their cognitive performance in the years prior to death. And we found that those people with more iron in red had a faster disease trajectory than those people with less iron. Another way of doing it is with MRI It's called quantitative susceptibility mapping. And on this case, more iron is to the right, and on the y-axis is rate of cognitive change. And people with Alzheimer's disease, more iron had a faster disease trajectory. Another way of looking at this is to look in the fluid that surrounds the brain. And we found also that people with more iron had a faster disease trajectory than those with low iron. So it stands to reason that maybe if we could lower iron, we could get a benefit. And actually, there was a clinical trial back in 1991 that showed a promise for this. They showed an iron chelator, that means a drug that removes iron, did lead to benefits to patients. But this was a very early study. They had lots of problems with it, and it needed to be repeated, but it wasn't repeated in the many years since this initial trial. So we decided to do this. And this is where the 3D trial comes in, deferoprone to delay dementia. Deferoprone is a more modern iron chelator. It's already used for other diseases of iron overload, and we tested it in a clinical trial of Alzheimer's disease. This has just happened. The results have just been collated, and this is one of the first times I'll be presenting this work. So this was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. The patients had Alzheimer's disease, and we treated them with deferoprone for 12 months, and we were looking to see if there was a change in cognition after 12 months. This is what we call a consort statement, and our trial was severely affected by COVID. We couldn't recruit people for a couple of years, and so we got much fewer participants than what we initially intended. And so ultimately we had 21 placebo and 33 deferoprone treated patients. So it was a small study, but we got a clear result. This is the baseline characteristics. I won't go through the details of this, but basically at baseline, doesn't matter if you're placebo or on drug, you had the same characteristics. So the first question we wanted to ask is, does deferoprone do what we thought it would do? Does it lower iron in the brain? And indeed it does. This is an MRI technique which we can measure iron in the brain, and you can see placebo, there's an elevation of iron that happens between baseline and 12 months, and in the drug trial, the people on drug had a lowering of brain iron. So it's doing what we thought it would do. The question is, does it improve patient outcomes? And this is what the result was. We found deferoprone dramatically worsened cognitive symptoms in people with Alzheimer's disease. So this was a real tragic result for us, and it was based on a decade or more of my research to see this. And while it's tragic for the patients, this provided so much insight into what's going on. This is a large effect, and so when we see large effects, we go, I can play with this. We can modify this, and if we understand the biochemistry better, we can get targets to see if we can get it to the reverse direction. So this gave us a big clue that the iron that accumulates within the brain, it's doing that for a reason. The brain is wanting that iron, and that is, while we see our iron elevation in Alzheimer's disease, we assumed it's bad. Maybe it's not so bad. And so now our effort is we're going back to the drawing board. Knowing how important iron seems to be for the progression of Alzheimer's disease, now we can go back and see if we can design therapeutics that would better able to target this in a more positive way. But we shouldn't just stick with iron. There are many approaches to take with Alzheimer's disease. And an idea I want to leave with you all tonight is that there are things that we can already be doing to stop or to reduce the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease and also to reduce its severity. And there are known modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease that are well established. And these should be familiar to you all because these are good practices for health in general. Undertaking physical activity regularly, keeping mentally stimulated, eating a balanced diet, reducing your alcohol intake, maintaining an active social life, maintaining healthy weight, quitting smoking, managing health conditions. I would add up there sleep, which I think is incredibly important for dementia as well. But the important message for this forum is that it's never too late to start this, but it's also never too early. We now know that Alzheimer's disease begins in the Middle Ages, and that's when we really need to be practicing these habits, and they need to be ongoing over the decades to preserve brain function. So summary of what I've come to tell you today is that dementia is a major disease, and it's a major disease of our era. New diagnostics are coming. and they will assist in identifying people in the very early stages of dementia, and we will do this with increased confidence. They have the potential to have a dramatic impact on how we diagnose dementia. But the health systems that support diagnosis and care for dementia are not up to scratch. We need to do more with this, and we need to find ways that we can do this in cost-effective ways that lead to better outcomes for patients. There are new disease-modifying drugs. Despite what I showed you today, I think they might be approved in Australia. They have been approved in America. They've been approved elsewhere. I think it's likely they will be approved in Australia. But we really don't know to the extent that they're going to give a benefit to patients. And so we'll need to just see this over the long term. But also we need to find new drugs. We've done a lot with anti-amyloid drugs, but now we need to find new drugs, new drug targets, and that's a major focus of our work. But another thing is that to delay dementia, we need not just use drugs. We can intervene now using health practices that do have substantial benefit for people at risk of dementia. So with that, I would like to give some acknowledgements. I want to give some acknowledgements to the many, many participants who were in this, who participated to this work, particularly the people of the 3D trial. I'm sorry that we didn't help you. But you have given us such great understanding of what's going on in Alzheimer's disease, and my hope and my commitment is that we'll use that information to find new drugs. And to the many people who have committed their time for us to be able to study them over many, many years, none of this research could happen without their involvement. And also like to thank the many clinicians and researchers and funding bodies that made all this work possible. And thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Susan Rossell. I'm a Senior NHMRC Fellow here at Swinburne University, and I have the great pleasure of closing this evening. And Scott has given us permission to ask a few questions. So does anyone have any burning questions for him? Okay.
Thank you. I noticed on one of the display boards outside that whilst it's the second leading cause of death in Australia, and you've said it's the leading one for women, but it's the seventh leading cause in the world generally. Why are we so high?
I think that our statistics really reflect what's going on in developed countries. In developing countries, obviously there are a range of other communicable diseases that are not so common in Australia. And the risk factors that Australia's health system has dealt so well with are not so well dealt with in developing countries. A big thing is smoking. Australia has got fairly low smoking rates. And we know that smoking causes heart disease and cancer, and that's much more prevalent in most other countries. There are also a range of other risk factors and communicable diseases that contribute to altered lifespan, but in countries now which have got high lifespan, then dementia is usually up there as one of the leading causes of death.
Great question.
Thank you. I'm here because my mother passed away from this hideous disease 3 months ago.
I'm sorry.
After a 14-year progression or digression. Look, halfway through her diagnosis, a very good friend who's an amateur diagnostician sent me a mix of every dietary aspect that had efficacy for Alzheimer's. And I prepared it for her and I gave it to her over a 2-week period. She couldn't tolerate the taste after that. It was like a river through her dementia. It washed it away. Mm. She completely turned back to I had my mother back for 2 weeks. A friend of hers rang up and had a chat to her. She couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Now, what I'm wondering, and of course I take it every day, and it's an open source. If anyone wants it, come and see me after. But no, it's what I want to know is what work's being done to look at this aspect of treatment in the absence of any effective drugs at the moment. Just to add that this mixture is essentially what is in Suvenaid, but it's more powerful, I think, because it's it's all fresh ingredients.
Great. Well, I don't know what's in your mixture. I'd be interested to hear about that. There is some evidence for Suvenaid and other products. We should be clear that like the drugs that we have, these are not curative at all, but they can have an impact. I mentioned in one of my last slides the importance of nutrition in delaying dementia, and this is one of the challenges that happen in dementia, is that people start to eat poorly, they don't regulate well, and they don't eat and drink well. And dehydration is also a factor as well. So I think nutrition is really important, and if it's difficult, obviously, to do this with food, also supplements, I think, can play an important role there. There is work that's being undertaken with that, and I think we should do more.
I would love for you all to ask lots of questions, but I am being told to keep to time. And Ted, I encourage you to talk to Scott afterwards. But I have been asked to give Scott this wonderful present and say thank you very much for the lecture this evening. We have appreciated everything that you've told us. It's been wonderful to hear, and I'm sure everybody in the room has really enjoyed hearing what you have had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I feel really bad cutting off Ted Bayview, but there you go. I've got two requests for the audience. So the front row need to stay because we need to have some photographs. And then as we leave the room, I'm just going to ask the first 5 rows to leave first, so we aren't all crowded on the stairs. And then when we start to see those 5 rows have left, can everyone towards the back of the room leave? And thank you very much for your attention this evening. It's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.